Batman. Be with me.
A reading from the Book of Nolans. He was the hero Gotham deserved, but not the one it needed right then. And so he was hunted, because he could take it. He is not our hero. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a dark knight. The word of Gordon. Na 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 na. Batman, Batman, Batman.
Turn me into what you need. You know my sense of self is getting thinner. Feed me with those lies until I'm fat enough to be the sacrificial lamb at your family dinner. I'll let you do just what you want. My own decisions are hazard to my health. I'll let you pick all my mistakes ahead of time. Keep me with those dolls upon your shelf. Ah, but if that's what it takes to get to you, oh, if that's what it takes, that's what I'll do.
(1939), New York City, National Allied Publications. Following the smash success debut of Superman the previous year, 24-year-old cartoonist Bob Kane was called upon to design a new superhero to build on Superman's success. Together with writer Bill Finger, Kane created Batman, who joined Superman in being two of history's very first superheroes. A new breed of mythological heroes possessing superhuman or magical powers, fighting evil in distinct costumes, often in order to disguise their true identities. The Amazing and Unique Adventures of the Batman debuted in May of 1939, Detective Comics number 27, and Batman was a hit. With people clamoring for more, Kane, Finger, and others continued putting pencils to paper. One of their first orders of business, coming up with Batman's origin. 2 pages in issue number 33. The young Bruce Wayne's wealthy parents get gunned down in a stick-up before his eyes, and he vows to avenge their deaths, becoming Batman, who became the main face of the Detective Comics series just 2 issues later in 1940. 1940 also saw the introduction of Batman's sidekick, Robin the Boy Wonder, as one of the first of many popular recurring support characters in the Batman lore. 1 month after that, Batman was given his own self-titled comic book series while continuing to appear in Detective Comics as well. Issue number 1 of Batman famously introduced 2 of Batman's most well-known nemeses, the Joker and Catwoman, who was originally referred to simply as the Cat. Batman continued to enjoy popularity throughout the 1940s and 50s, going from a quarterly publication to a bi-monthly publication to 8 times a year to eventually a new issue every month, with 2 film serials along the way. And the lore continued to grow. Batman was placed in Gotham City, the Batmobile designated his mode of transportation, and he was introduced to new allies such as his love interest Vicky Vale and his butler Alfred, as well as new and popular enemies including the Penguin, Two-Face, and the Riddler. During this time, the Batman series moved away from the harsher realism present in the earliest comics by no longer giving him a gun or having him kill anyone, and further stepped into science fiction, giving Batman all kinds of unique gadgets and modes of transportation. He was fighting aliens and robots.
There's one where he somehow gets abducted by aliens and taken to a far-off planet where they're having an intergalactic Olympics, and Batman is suspended in a huge zero-gravity glass sphere fighting this huge muscled green guy from Jupiter.
As well as delving into historical fiction, with Batman and Robin time-traveling to real-life ancient Rome.
Oh, there was just all kinds of stuff. Batman got transformed into all sorts of weird red kryptonite-ish mutations. And you wonder, wait a minute, who is this? What hero is this? Is this Superman who goes to different planets? No, it's Batman.
By 1960, Batman was fighting alongside Superman, Wonder Woman, and others as a member of the superhero super team, the Justice League of America. Although going into the mid-1960s, Batman and Detective Comics sales had begun to slide, some changes in personnel and the release of the television series Batman in 1966 would send sales to new levels. Taking on a campy, upbeat tone with a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, the TV series became enough of a success in its own right to influence the comic books, being responsible for the introduction of Batgirl as the teenage daughter of Gotham City's Commissioner Gordon. This re-emergence of success was short-lived, however, and after 3 seasons, the TV series was canceled and sales of the comics fell yet again. This prompted a back-to-basics approach in the comic books going into the 1970s. Meanwhile, Batman continued on television as an animated character, making wide-ranging appearances on a variety of cartoon shows, including the Batman Superman Hour, Super Friends, and even teaming up with Scooby-Doo more than once in the new Scooby-Doo movies. The last of the 70s series, The New Adventures of Batman, ended in 1981, sending Batman into syndication. After several decades of lighter fare, Batman received a reinvention, an older hero coming out of retirement in Batman: The Dark Knight by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, notably with Robin as female. In book form, Batman: The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One, an update to Batman's origin story, became bestsellers, all leading up to the 1989 premiere of Tim Burton's feature film, Batman.
I'm Batman.
Which sent Batman to new heights, becoming one of the highest-grossing films of all time. The 80s also introduced a new medium for the Batman story: video games. The first actually appeared in 1986, although for many it began on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1989. In the 30 years since, the number of officially licensed Batman games has soared to over 60. In 1992, Burton followed up his hit film with Batman Returns. And the same year, Batman returned to television, with Batman the Animated Series running through most of the decade leading into Batman Beyond. Airing from 1999 to 2001, Batman Beyond was set in a future in which Terry McGinnis becomes the next Batman. Batman would also return to theaters twice more in the 90s under Joel Schumacher's new direction, with Batman Forever in 95 and Batman and Robin in 97. Critically panned, it wasn't until 8 years later that the Batman film franchise found new life in Christopher Nolan, who directed a commercially successful Batman film trilogy: Batman Begins in 2005, The Dark Knight in 2008, and The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. The serious tone was rewarded with a Best Supporting Actor Oscar win for Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight as the Joker. The 1990s and 2000s brought a large increase to Batman comic book lines and stories, and characters were vastly expanded and compounded upon. A number of characters received spin-offs, including Catwoman, Barbara Gordon, Harley Quinn, former Robin Dick Grayson's new secret identity Nightwing, a new Batgirl named Cassandra Cain, and a number of others. In Batman number 655, Bruce Wayne's son Damian was introduced to the storyline, becoming the fifth Robin in 2009. Batman Arkham Asylum was a multi-platform video game release hailed for its take on the Batman story based on the 1989 graphic novel of the same name. The series became the Guinness World Record holder for most critically acclaimed superhero game ever. And after DC Comics had just hit the reset button in 2011 with the New 52, Batman Zero Year updated Batman's origin story yet again. And only 5 years later, the New 52 were ended to make way for a whole new relaunch, DC Rebirth. In 2016, the film series moved into its next era, with Ben Affleck donning the cape in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. Even a Lego Batman, featured in 2014's The Lego Movie, voiced by Will Arnett, was a popular enough version of the character to warrant his own sequel in the Lego Batman movie in 2017. At the time of the making of this film, it's been only 78 years since Batman made his debut in Detective Comics number 27. But in those 78 years, Batman has managed to maintain such popularity and capture the imaginations of so many that we've seen him presented in more different and contradictory iterations than years have gone by. All of which raises the question, with these different takes on Batman and all their varying levels of public support and admiration, and consistency for that matter, what exactly is the official take on Batman? What's the official story? And perhaps most importantly, for those of us who are after the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, in our appreciation of the series, what is considered canon? The council has been instructed not to speak until the arrival of introspective man. The council stands by.
Introspective man すべて知らないわかるいつもちゃんと考える皆準備して Introspective man と気ぐりボイにとけ
Would you consider yourself an expert of Batman? No. Is this something you feel that you could potentially contribute?
Nah, I don't think I could.
Well, I don't know if you're an expert on Batman or not.
Not really.
This year, Introspective Man and Giggly Boy have a very important mission in mind at Comic-Con.
We're going to Comic-Con in search of the best and brightest Batman fans to come together and canonize the Batman series in what we're calling the first Council of the Bat.
So lame. So lame.
You might be a Batman expert.
Maybe.
This is the card. There's a Gmail. I'm wondering, would you consider yourself a Batman expert?
But not all is well in the world of Introspective Man and Giggly Boy.
Apparently somebody thought it would be funny last night to prank me by putting a giant green question mark on the lawn made out of used green cups.
Who would do such a thing?
There's only one being evil enough to have done such a sinister act. I refer to my arch nemesis, Matt Ott. But you know what, Mad Eye? Listen here right now, you son of a bitch. Let me tell you something. This time...
How do you know it's Mad Eye?
Because... All right, Giggly Boy. It's always Mad Eye, all right?
Okay.
Always.
Well, maybe it's the Riddler. All right, the question marks are kind of his signature after all.
Yeah,
Right?
Mad Eye knows that we're doing the Batman thing, so he thinks it'd be funny to fuck with us. But you know what, Mad Eye? Fuck! God.
港にしてイントロスペクティブなギグリボーイにとって
Something tells me things are about to get batty. I'm Introspective Man, and sitting among you all along has been my sidekick, Giggly Boy. You have traveled here from far and wide, near and far, from New York to Craigslist. Welcome to the Council of the Bat! Okay, on to the point of the day. Batman. Over the years, Batman has seen many versions, many authors, many takes. Some good, some great, some not so great. It's time we settled the debate, which is why we have gathered here today, the world's best and brightest to do so. I speak of only Robert Robin Sky, Colin C, Joan Elliott, Ryan Nelson, Eric Pitcher, Jade Scafade, something short, Kenny Somerville, and Mikhail Grizz. Citizens, today we will be placing all 78 years of Batman into a single canon. What's in, what's out. No easy task. Nobody said it would be. But I know you can do it. Giggly Boy, my trusted sidekick, I leave you to lead the panel while I tend to introspective matters of my own. You have 24 hours.
Nah, no. We have the room until 6, so we don't have 24 hours, guys.
Okay. Then you have
Until 6 o'clock.
You have until 6. Okay? So, good luck. And until we meet again, keep thinking.
Are we gonna document this?
I'm intimidated. How about you?
So, guys, where do we begin?
'52 CE, Greece, the house of Priscilla and Aquila, approximate. Following the smashing success debut of Mithraism years earlier, which was beginning to steal popularity away from the existing cults of Bacchus and Osiris, 40-something missionary Paul was called upon from on high to popularize a new deity to build on Mithra's success. Together with missionary Timothy, Paul created the earliest surviving written testament of Jesus, who joined Mithra as two of history's latest and greatest savior gods, a classic breed of mythological heroes possessing superhuman or magical powers, fighting and preaching against evil, often disguised as mortal men who undergo sufferings or struggles to triumph over death. The earliest adventures of the Lord Jesus Christ debuted in what is estimated to be late 52, the first epistle to the Thessalonians, and Jesus was a hit. With people clamoring for more, Paul, Timothy, and others continued putting pens to papyrus, such as the author known as Mark, who crafted the very first gospel sometime in the 100 years following, expanding on the lore by giving Jesus a biography and placing him on earth. During this 100-year period, the Jesus series moved away from the abstract symbolism present in the earliest epistles of Paul by no longer placing him in the celestial realm of visions and cosmic events. It stepped further into parables, allegories, and the fantasy adventure genre. Jesus was given all kinds of cool powers and abilities, such as fighting sinners and demons through exorcisms, walking on water, and multiplying food, as well as delving into historical fiction with Jesus meeting Pontius Pilate or being chased after by Herod the Great.
In Mark, the earliest gospel, you got Jesus appearing on the scene as a man. He's endowed with the Holy Spirit, does miracles, and so on.
We start with a gospel that seems to be completely allegorical from start to finish.
Jesus was a carpenter and he dies by a nail and hammer. Come on, let's put those things together. I mean, there's a lot of coincidences.
Mark's gospel also introduced Jesus' sidekick, Simon Peter, the apostle of the apostles, one of the first of many popular recurring support characters in the Jesus lore. Jesus was also now said to be ministering alongside Peter, James, and others as leader of the apostolic superteam, the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. More gospels, offshoots of Mark, would soon emerge with the gospels of Matthew and Luke. They served as alternate takes on the biography of Jesus presented in Mark, in some cases lifting exact passages, while in other cases expanding the lore or changing details to fit their specific agenda. Matthew, for example, replaces the name of one of the apostles, Levi the tax collector, with his own titular name, perhaps to suggest a first-person account.
They all include different tales, and it should be more consistent than that. Even if you put down the degree of error from witnesses, you should still have more cohesion than you get.
They're each kind of arguing with each other over time, and they're unhappy with the original gospel, so they keep rewriting it.
Another important order of business not taken care of by Mark, coming up with Jesus' origin. 2 chapters in the Gospel according to Matthew. The divine Jesus of Nazareth is born to the Virgin Mary, becoming the Son of God, who became the main face of the Christian movement as it emerged over the following decades. Their popularity prompted the author of Luke to write a sequel to its gospel, expanding on the lore of Jesus' team of followers in Acts of the Apostles, or simply Acts, as it's commonly referred to among fans. The exact dates of authorship for Matthew, Luke, and Acts are unknown, much like Mark. But without mass media or widespread literacy, it is highly improbable that they were written any sooner than a decade or more after Mark.
You've got to allow a decent amount of time for Matthew and Luke to have used Mark. They must have gotten a hold of it, and of course they couldn't have gone to a bookstore and gotten it. It would have taken a bit of time.
In general, literacy was not widespread. In terms of someone who was able to pick up, for example, a gospel and read it, when you're looking at that kind of thing, maybe 5 to 10% at most of the populace would be able to do that.
But the authors of Matthew and Luke were among those who could, and the lore continued to grow. Jesus was placed in Nazareth. A donkey designated his mode of transportation, and he was introduced to new allies such as his mother, the Virgin Mary, and his female companion whom he rescues from demons, Mary Magdalene. A passing character in Mark's Gospel, expanded on by Matthew and Luke, she was later retconned into Mark to include these details in what's known as the long ending that appears in the Bible today. This era also saw the introduction of new popular enemies, including the Pharisees, Judas Iscariot, and a readapted old Jewish favorite, Satan. Of course, without there being anything like a copyright on Jesus literature, as the cult of Christianity began to spread, so did the number of people writing about Jesus. They gave their own versions of the story and complicated things even further.
In fact, we have Paul complaining about people preaching other Jesuses, other Christs, other Gospels.
There's whole epistles written by Paul that Paul refers to in his letters that we don't have.
With all these competing Gospels and epistles going into the 2nd century, it was the release of the Gospel according to John that would send followers soaring to new levels. John took on a campy, more fantastical tone, with a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, illustrated by Jesus' newest miracle, turning water into wine to save a wedding party. The new gospel became enough in its own right to influence the other gospels. It introduced Lazarus of Bethany as the man Jesus raises from the dead, changing up the story on why Jesus is prosecuted by the Pharisees.
We're not talking about minor quibbles and eyewitness testimony variations like, oh, Mark says that Jesus wore a red t-shirt and Luke says he wore a blue t-shirt. No, we're talking about, and Jesus raised a guy from the dead and that's why he got in trouble with the Pharisees. Or Jesus did something else completely different.
The Gospel of John depicts Jesus so differently and his teaching so differently and the order of events so differently. It's really hard to imagine this is to be taken seriously as a historical source. The words of Jesus sound just like the words of John the Baptist in the Gospel of John, and just like the narrator of the Gospel of John, and just like the writer of the epistles of John. So what does that tell you? It's like a Woody Allen movie where everybody sounds like Woody because he wrote all their parts.
During this time, with the success of John and its more colorful tales, we find dozens more Gospels being written. Authors set out to expand on the stories of Jesus' childhood and other adventures of the apostles. Some could be considered remakes, others sequels or prequels.
We know the titles, at least the titles, of about 40 different Gospels.
The Gospel of Peter, for example, doesn't just improve on Mark and Matthew's and Luke's story, but it has Jesus coming out of the tomb, growing to 500 feet tall, and the cross coming out of the tomb and talking to us.
There's the Gospel according to the Hebrews, and the Gospel according to the Ebionites, and the Gospel according to the Nazareans. These all seem to be different versions of Matthew.
You have the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is much smarter than what you get in the actual canon.
There's a collection of hilarious ones, the so-called infancy Gospels.
The Jesus in these stories does things like creates miracles, brings inanimate objects to life, and he's a holy terror.
He's on the playground and some kid bumps into him and knocks him down, and Jesus says, "You will go no further in your course." And the kid drops dead.
He's a little brat. He's a hellion, and he's constantly killing his playmates and anyone who gets in his face too much.
Sort of a Damien Christ Jesus.
A Dennis the Menace Jesus.
Jesus is playing with some kid on top of a ruined building, and the kid falls off and dies, and the parents say, "Oh, must be that brat Jesus. He's always killing his playmates." And Jesus says, he raises him from the dead, and he said, "Zeno, did I push you over?" No, he didn't.
Stories of young super Jesus when he was growing up in Smallville, or should I say, in Nazareth.
Joseph is in the carpenter shop, and he's such an incompetent boob, he can't get the legs of a chair he's making the same length. But Jesus comes in and fixes it, and it's hilarious stuff, and I think unintentionally hilarious. That stuff remained very popular, and a couple of stories from that are in evidence in the Quran.
And although it wouldn't be until the 7th century that Jesus appeared in Islamic texts as Isa, within the roughly 150 years following the authorship of Paul's first epistle, at least dozens of different Gospels and other writings on Jesus were already composed. And while textual clues, references to contemporary events and writing styles can imply the order they may have been written in, it's difficult to even place what is agreed to be the first of them, the Gospel of Mark, which could have been written anywhere from the 60s and 70s CE to the mid-2nd century.
The Gospels are not mentioned by any church writer for sure until Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon in Gaul. He's the first one to refer to the ones we know of as 4 Gospels. And when's he writing? Around 180. I think it's not unlikely that the Gospels were written just before that.
We're even more in the dark for the non-canonical Gospels than we are for the canonical Gospels, and we barely even know when the canonical Gospels were written. We know they were just written sometime.
You can't just take the earliest possible date for it and say, well, that's when it was written. You see why people do, though, because they want to narrow the gap between Jesus and the Gospels.
When Irenaeus hit the scene as the Bishop of Lugdunum in Gaul, it had been just over 100 years since the approximate release of the first epistle to the Thessalonians, which is where Jesus made his literary debut, as far as we can prove. And in those 100+ years, Jesus had managed to maintain such popularity and captured the imaginations of so many that we saw him presented in more different and contradictory iterations than years had gone by. Which raised the question, with all these different takes on Jesus and all of their varying levels of public support and admiration, and consistency for that matter, what exactly was the official take on Jesus? What was the official story? And perhaps, most importantly, for those of us who are after the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, in our appreciation of the scriptures, what was considered canon?
I don't know what the word canonize means.
Basically just means, like, what is established, like, this is the reality of this character or this universe. Its history, its established history of, like, what is accepted to be true.
Okay, well, that's easy.
Starts with Thomas and Martha Wayne. Everybody knows it's Thomas and Martha Wayne have to die for the Batman to become who he is.
That's the tragedy of the story. That's where it sets them off, the domino effect.
Right.
Well, unless we're talking Flashpoint Batman.
Right.
The canon-making instinct to control the dissemination of ideas and beliefs through an approved, let's say a list of approved writings and, equally important, of disapproved ones. This is not unique to Christianity nor required in a religion, because in Buddhism, for instance, you got all sorts of scriptures, but different movements and sects within it have their favorite books.
Jacob! Reuben! There we go. Oh. This might make things a little bit easier for you. And this is going to be a lot of work.
To aid in their decision-making, the Council has been provided visual graphic representations of the various installments in the Batman series in its first 78 years.
Pass something down to me. I don't care. Anything.
Oh, this is a big one.
There's a lot of them in there, guys. If anybody wants to, you guys don't have to feel, you can...
Can we all agree that Catwoman can just be thrown out?
Say that you don't acknowledge it. So everyone?
I don't acknowledge
that.
Give me some background on it.
All right. After the 60s Batman, which was campy and comedic, Batman almost actually was out of publication. That's how close to death it was. Okay, let's make a dark story. Go back to 1939, Dark Creature of the Night. That led to Dark Knight Returns. So I definitely acknowledge this story.
You made a good point.
So we have push pins, and what we're going to do is put the push pin on the wall, right over there. So feel free to stab that wall, baby.
Detective 27.
Yes.
May of 1939.
But I'm seeing this as a big collaborative, so that means we also have to acknowledge the rainbow Batman suits. I don't know if I can accept that.
Here's the thing, though. While, the colored suits is not the Batman that I personally like either, the way I view it is, if you think about comics as mythology, everyone who tells the story is going to tell it differently. So what I believe is, like, with these detective comics, focus less on aesthetical looks and think more about the story. And if there's important story elements from beginning to end, that is now part of the mythos.
So that's a window where even this, though campy, has to be acceptable.
Yes.
To some degree.
For me, if it gave us something that is now part of what we do believe to be Batman, then it has its importance. I unfortunately have to go. Let me know what we come up with.
Good luck.
All right.
You guys go to the bathroom?
When Japanese game designers Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka created The Legend of Zelda for Nintendo in the mid-'80s, it could not have been easy to imagine their game would turn into a worldwide phenomenon with dozens of iterations selling over 75 million copies in its first 30 years. But with no initial plan to give the games an overarching story, it didn't take long before deciphering a consistent storyline from one installment to the next became more challenging than the games themselves. Nintendo of America released a timeline to the internet in 2001, which was rejected by the fans for not making sense, but the game developers themselves offered no official explanation. Another decade went by, and as more and more games entered production, their connections to one another became more and more difficult to discern, despite the recurring cast of characters. In 2011, Nintendo of Japan finally gave in to fans' demands and retroactively published a complicated but official chronology of the Legend of Zelda games in a guidebook entitled Hyrule Historia, stating that there were 3 separate timelines with multiple heroes. Much like with the Batman series, popular demand by Legend of Zelda followers prompted its creators to bend their creation to meet fans' demands for an official canon. Consequently, some games that maintain official licenses, such as those produced for the CDI or the recent crossover Hyrule Warriors, are not considered canon, but they're still acknowledged by Nintendo, in the case of Hyrule Warriors, selling 1 million copies for them. But what about games Nintendo isn't making money off of? What about
Echoes of Aurelia,
The Cipher of Time,
or The Legend of Zelda, The Lampshade of No Real Significance?
Well, those Nintendo does not want you to play.
We still talk about the canon of Western literature, the stuff you gotta read. Well, usually that doesn't mean you can't read anything but Shakespeare and Dickens and stuff like that, but it did with a canon of scripture.
Now, most of the sects, they didn't mind. Like, if you initiated yourself into the mysteries of Osiris, and then initiated yourselves into the mysteries of Mithras, that was fine. They didn't care. Now, technically that mattered because where your money went, right, you're going to be dividing your money. The Christians came up with the idea of exclusivity. You can only be us. You can only join us. You can't join other cults simultaneously. And so, obviously, this then, if you finally decide to do that, that filters all their money your direction. So that's actually a pretty smart marketing move.
Today, it's easy for Nintendo to claim and control the Legend of Zelda. But for Irenaeus and the Church, controlling the official canonical scriptures for Christianity had them up against more than just the lampshade of no real significance.
What happened was, sometime around 140 AD, Marcion actually started producing his own canon, started basically marketing his own version of Christianity with his own selection of books, which he edited in the way that he wanted to.
Marcion of Sinope was an early Christian leader whose views were that the teachings of Jesus were incompatible with the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. The organization of his canon reflected ditheistic views in which Jesus and God were considered to be completely separate from one another, a higher God and a lower God.
And there were rival sects that didn't like this, and they wanted to compete with his churches, wanted to compete with what he's doing, and so they assembled a counter canon.
We want to counterbalance Marcion, we want to sanitize the Marcionite texts that we can use, and we want to bring in other stuff allegedly by other apostles.
So what I think they were doing is they were trying to find gospels that they could pick, that were the most popular gospels, that had the most people backing them, that would bring the most churches into their church, but that they could still spin as being in favor of the ideology they wanted to sell.
But the stuff that was radically different, but had apostolic authorship supposedly, like Thomas and so on. Well, now that has to be a spurious forgery, I think Eusebius says. How do we know that?
Yeah, this is, we lied to you about this. This is complete nonsense. Oh, but this other equally absurd thing, oh, that's real.
You, commoner, you don't get to read the book and decide. We've already decided what's the right interpretation.
We don't want Christians to be heretics. That's one big reason they didn't want Christians reading the Bible for centuries, right? Who knows what crazy interpretation you might come up with, but you better leave the driving to us.
This new Christian canon was explained as the authoritative Word of God, one of authentic apostolic authorship or endorsement. And the rest, like those only included in Marcion's canon, were not. But problems arise with this, as some of the texts included refer to other texts not included. If not canon, then why is the Book of Enoch referred to several times in both Jude and Peter? The Book of Jasher, the Assumption of Moses, the life of Adam and Eve, the Epistle to the Laodiceans, all referred to, quoted, or alluded to in the New Testament canon, as well as an earlier letter from Paul to the Corinthians referenced in what is known as the First Epistle to the Corinthians, which was evidently not the first after all. But none are considered canonical or to be on God's authority by today's Christianity, unlike the other books.
Why would God write a book that refers to other books that are written by human authors? I mean, why would God make a reference to a human author? Or if those books were written by God, then why aren't they in the canon? Why does the book talk about those other books and tell people to refer to those other books if they're not part of canon or were intended to be part of canon?
So they left stuff out. They left whole letters out. They left sections out. And the question is why? Why would they do that? And I mean, that's very suspicious generally when you see that happen.
People are actually making their own decisions as to what stories they want in there, and there's no telling what arbitrary reason they might pluck one out.
If we're talking about stuff that we can like easily drop on the floor, Justice Unbalanced here, which I'm seeing for the first time, but I'm seeing that it's apparently created by the Learning Company.
Toy Man. Canon or no?
We do not
accept
acknowledge
Batman and the Toy Man,
that.
Batman Nevermore, Batman and Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah. I think that's a quick trip to the floor. Are we?
Yeah. Superman and Batman versus vampires and werewolves.
I would just cut it off. DK1. That saved it big time.
The New Adventures of Batman. Do we consider that canon? Let's take a vote. Okay, so raise your hand if you think it should be considered canon. All right, so majority rules on that one, right? No, that's half. That's split. That's a split vote.
Yeah.
So he didn't vote at all.
abstaining.
So you're you can't abstain. You're the tiebreaker. You are the tiebreaker.
I believe I can speak on behalf of all of us when I say we do not acknowledge Scribblenauts Unmasked, a DC Comics adventure.
Because I don't want to toss that and then we saying fuck Talon.
No, Talon will still be in the Court of Owls.
All right, get his ass out of here.
I say we should cut off one of those and stick that on top of one of those.
We do not acknowledge the Lego Batman series. We'll call it. Yeah.
I'll accept it, but I just want us to be careful of how much bullshit it is.
Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, Frank Miller, and Jim Lee's take.
Oh, out.
But it has Joker having sex with some chick with a dragon tattoo on his back.
We do not acknowledge the Teen Titans TV series.
Then that mean y'all getting rid of everything Dick Grayson?
No, there's plenty. There's plenty. Trust me.
All right.
It kicks ass. There is no jump button. That just really bothered me.
That's more of a gameplay mechanic.
Exactly, it's a gameplay mechanic.
I thought about this long and hard.
The Batman can kill. The Batman cannot commit murder.
This is what Batman stands for.
Oh, Batgirl.
Yes.
Yeah, Batgirl.
Yes.
Yeah. Do not acknowledge Man-Bat.
Molly, Superboy. We'll both know each other's secret identities and fight crime together. We do not acknowledge this shit.
Wait, so the one that
in
we just
1939.
the one we just threw on the ground and crumpled up is the first death of Batman?
Do I need to pick that back up off the floor? And
If you limit the channels of revelation, you can control Christian thinking.
People have to believe this, and people tell me that they have forced themselves to believe whatever the Bible says because their salvation depends on it. And one person described it to me as eating the word, where they gather together, and they read some impossible, outrageous passage in the Bible and then force themselves to believe that. Wow, isn't that amazing what God did? And you just constantly reinforce this idiocy in your mind because you have to believe. You have to make believe. So we're talking about the power of pretend.
Look, you can keep your doubts to yourself. I don't want to know about Muhammad and Krishna and all that. I just want to stick with Jesus, me and Jesus. And if you say, well, it's not really that simple, that's why they say Satan is sowing the seeds of doubt. And in a sense, that's just their way of saying, we want you to remain blithely within the camp. We don't want to lose you.
Father,
yes, son.
forgive me, for I have sinned.
Tell me about your sin.
I read a Spider-Man scripture book.
Was it Spider-Man and Batman from 1995 or 1997's Batman and Spider-Man?
Don't you get it? It was neither of them. Batman wasn't in this scripture book.
Oh, this is a very serious sin, my son.
I know, Father, I know.
What in the name of Thomas Wayne were you thinking?
I know, Father, I know.
Your penance shall be to say 40 Kiss from a Rosaries you will find the Batman Forever soundtrack songbook in the pews on your way out. May Batman be with you.
I got kicked out of my house when I was young, and like that's when I just really started like picking out, like just reading the Bible, because I felt like, oh, okay, well, nobody else loves me. Maybe I should start going into church or start getting into church more. Maybe I need to get myself right with God and things will get better. Then I read the Bible and I'm like, dude, this shit makes no sense, dude. Like, I started reading the Quran too, and the similarities are actually like, you'd be surprised like how similar they are. Like you'll just read them and you're like, dude, there's so much bullshit, like so much.
Many like Muslim scholars, like when they talk about Christianity, they talk about the Trinity. Like it's so crazy idea, right? They talk about how is that even possible? And yet they believe that Muhammad flew on a winged horse from Jerusalem. Like okay, like you just call this crazy. Like this is the word of God. It's like this is not negotiable. So even when they don't understand, like people like Pakistanis and Indonesians, they don't understand Arabic, right? But they have to pray in Arabic. And when they pray, the direction of the prayer has to be towards Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia. That creates like this very strong, I don't know, identity that we're all like one people and we're the best people. But unfortunately, everybody else seems like to think the same. Every other religion says we have something that other people do not.
Well, I went to a Kadiwa special service, and the entire service was about don't follow the rest of the world. Don't follow this bad generation. You don't need higher education as long as you have your membership in the church. Right. Don't be like the rest of the kids who think being gay is cool. I mean, that's literally what it was. And everyone was, and they're all my age. And they're all saying like, yeah. I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you people?
I think the moment you're able to question it, the moment like all the ideas start like breaking apart. I think the power of religion has always been community, I think.
It's always proactive with religion too, where, I mean, that's why they push so hard for baptisms really early, for Sunday schools, for any type of children's worship services, anything like that, because they know you're gonna have those doubts anyway. I mean, everyone does, even the most devout religious have the doubts, but then they try to train you right away to have this apologetic for this one, for this reason, to answer this question. Right. And by then, it doesn't even bother you anymore that it doesn't make sense because, like you said, you have the community, so why bother care about what they're actually saying? I'm happy here.
They try to get you to put down roots as much as possible right from the get-go. And in my experience as a former Jehovah's Witness, it was about isolation. So they don't want you to have friends outside of that community. And so your entire social circle is within the group. And when you have that kind of connection to your community and it's connected to your belief system, to question your beliefs causes existential panic. Because if my beliefs aren't true, then this is all fabricated and I'm gonna lose everybody. I'm gonna lose everybody if I don't keep believing this.
When you decided you didn't want to be Mormon anymore, what challenges did you face?
I mean, it was pretty similar. You know that you're about to bring shame to your family and you're about to lose everybody. And you kind of want to lie to yourself that that's not true. They still love me, but they just can't associate with me because, I no longer believe, and they have to believe that means that I've been infiltrated by the devil. That's just kind of, so I had to move, pick up and start your life all over again.
I was disfellowshipped, so I was kicked out. Everybody that I thought was my friend quit talking to me. So having true friends now is really awesome.
The Greco-Roman world in which the early church developed was one of diverse religions. The conditions of that era made it possible for these religions to sweep like a tidal wave over the ancient world. The people of that age were eager and zealous in their search for religious experience. The existence of this atmosphere was vitally important in the development and eventual triumph of Christianity. This is the opening paragraph to a paper by Martin Luther King Jr. for a course on Greek religion in his second year at Crozer Theological Seminary. In it, he identifies the many fundamental likenesses between Christianity and pre-existing religions and cults and how that came to be, calling Christians the heralds of another mystery religion and Jesus the Lord of the cult. King goes on to explain, after being in contact with the surrounding religions and hearing certain doctrines expressed, it was only natural for some of these views to become a part of their subconscious minds. When they sat down to write, they were expressing consciously that which had dwelled in their subconscious minds. Borrowing was not only natural, but inevitable. King's essay was given an A, an exceedingly good paper.
Another interesting thing we find when we listen to Paul and the way he describes his religion is how similar it is to what we see with the mystery faiths.
We have a lot of parallels that we can find, certainly in the Gospel of Mark, between the way the Jesus story is written and the way the Romulus story is written.
Romulus was the mythical founder of Rome, said to be the son of the god Mars, born to a Vestal virgin, who ascended into heaven to become a god after his death. The legends surrounding Romulus became central to the story of Rome's origins, and traditions and cults began to form around him, all hundreds of years before the onset of Jesus cults and Christianity.
And this Romulus story was not only written and popularized throughout the Roman Empire, but it was celebrated. They actually had passion plays. There was the Passion of Romulus that were acted out every year in these festivals. And they would act out the fear and confusion of people at the vanishing of his body, and the names of the people that ran away at the discovery that he was missing would be read out. And it would be performed probably in every place that the Romans had a presence.
This mingling of these religious memes and tropes and ideas was unprecedented at the time.
So maybe that's where the concept comes from, you know what I mean? That maybe they saw, similar deities.
This is taken from so many different religions, different regions, different perspectives, and it's just all kind of crazy glued together.
If you look at the individual stories of the Gospels, virtually every one of them, I can think of one possible exception, look like rewrites from the Old Testament, specifically the Greek translation, because the Greek wording in the Gospels sometimes is exactly the same.
So the people around Christianity reached back into Judaism to connect their religion with something much more ancient.
They're actually transforming the stories to make them the way they want the stories to be, and their hope is that their new revised stories will replace the old ones.
One of the surest ways to sell an ideology in the ancient world was to claim that your source was a god. And in a way, their sources were gods, just gods that were other people's ideas before them.
And so it occurs to me that why would God create his son to be a sequel to a human idea?
They're rewriting the values of the Roman message. And they're taking the Romulus story and rewriting it into a Jewish story and then throwing in their own particular value spins on it. And that's an example of how they were transforming these traditions, merging them with Judaism to create something that they believed was superior.
The cults that would become Christianity were not the first nor would be the last to take existing rituals and myths and modify them to their own era and cause.
I think a lot of people don't realize that the teachings of Islam correspond very much to Torah-observant Christianity.
Like Christianity before it, Islam arrived on the scene roughly 600 years later to be an improvement on the existing religious practices of the time. Today, it has converted nearly a quarter of the world's population into identifying as Muslims. And much like Christianity, it came on the authority of God, this time delivered through the Prophet Muhammad in a book known as the Quran.
هذا الكتاب لا ريب فيه means this book is infallible or incorruptible, while the previous books like the Injil and the Torah got corrupted.
The narrative on Jesus also changes in Islam, who is now explained as the author of the gospel and not the Son of God. He is only a great prophet, giving more importance to the final prophet, Muhammad, said to be the author of the Quran, God's final authority.
Jesus, who in Arabic called Isa, is a prophet of God, and he is the last prophet before Muhammad. And he's also believed that he was a Muslim, but they also believe that the message of Jesus got corrupted over time, and that's why God sent the Quran to be kind of the final revelation.
And since Jesus was no longer an equivalent to God, certain details that didn't jive with that were simply removed.
When it comes to the subject of crucifixion, it wasn't Jesus himself who was crucified. It is believed that somebody who looked like Jesus, and people were deceived thinking that he was Jesus. And it is believed that Jesus directly went into heaven without any form of crucifixion.
So it's a spin-off, essentially. But so is Mormonism. Mormonism is the same thing. They just added a little bit of, outer space, interplanetary alien stuff.
Mormonism, like Islam, makes the claim that all previous texts written about the same subject were corrupted by men, and that theirs, the Book of Mormon, is God's actual true word.
It's the exact same analogy we have with the mystery faiths and with early Christianity.
It added tales to appeal to a 19th century American audience, such as Jesus traveling to America after his resurrection.
It's a great example of fan fiction because you have, Jesus resurrects, and what did he do then? Well, no, he flew to America, and then guess what? The lost 12th tribe of Israel was there.
Worldwide, the amount of unique Christian denominations number in the thousands. Extended to include sects of Islam, despite agreement on little else, over half of the world's population would agree that the legends of Jesus Christ are rooted in fact. What Paul could barely convince the Corinthians of in his letters nearly 2,000 years ago now has several billion members of the human race not even giving its validity a second thought.
Look, all I'm saying is if Batman were alive during World War V, there would still be in Australia.
Batman couldn't have done anything. That's why we're waiting for Superman.
Save me the Superman speech. Look, I respect your views and your beliefs, but you're not gonna, convince me of anything.
Batman wasn't even alive for World War V.
Are you trying to say that Batman wasn't a real person?
No. I acknowledge that Batman was a real guy. He was a real hero. But he didn't have any superpowers. That's Superman. That's why Superman is the greatest superhero of all time. Now, if you'll excuse me. Nope, that's got Krypton's that way.
This might be controversial. But I think we need to chuck this. Listen, as much as I like Ben Affleck's portrayal of Batman, I don't think that Man of Steel and its follow-up, basically, I don't think it really represents Batman. It's basically all about Superman in this aspect. The next movie, in my opinion, is probably going to suck too, and I think we should chuck it.
I think that everything that we're looking at here, we got tons of information in front of us, things that we're familiar with, things that we've never seen before. If we're canonizing, there's a bigger thing that we're acknowledging, which is the distance that a fictional character like Batman has reached. None bigger than the ultimate destination and holy grail of saying, you know what? People are lined up around the block on a Friday to go see a premiere. So what I'm talking about right now is the magnitude of movies.
You said people waiting around the block for the premiere. A week later, no one was waiting for that.
That's fine.
Nobody was waiting for that. People realized it was a lousy movie.
Let's not lose sight of the point that I'm making.
But is it canon?
Was Batman versus Superman about Batman, or was it about Superman?
Ooh, good question.
Whether you like the movie or not, how important is it to acknowledge that it made it that far?
Both of these movies, in my opinion, were about Superman. Batman was just, like with Wonder Woman, just two people that were a part of Superman's world. So how is it canon to Batman?
I don't even think you saw it.
All right, hang on.
I don't think you saw it.
I saw
you telling me that both opening scenes in Bat v Superman are only about Batman. But they had to minimize it because people would have lost their shit if we had another origin story. So they capped the origin story a little bit. They showed you his mom and daddy getting murdered in front of the theater in one of the most epic slow motion scenes I ever seen when those pearls go loose on her neck.
This is going to be a Batman movie for a new generation. And this new generation is going to have an influence on what is canonized.
Sure.
Like we all have a different version of Batman because we've all read different variations of him. We've all seen different cartoons. We all clearly have very different opinions on it.
I think it's too close for us to decide, is this canon? Because it's only a couple years old. I mean, we look back, okay, 1939, 1940s, 50s, 60s, we can say, oh, this stuff, Children's Television Workshop in the 70s, that's crap, da-da-da. This is within the last couple of years. How can we, as a panel, decide that this is canon when it's still emerging, when it's still evolving?
It's canon because you have no other theatrical representation.
It doesn't matter if it's a theatrical representation or not. Is this canon?
I'm going to tell you how much it's canon. If it don't get on that wall, I'm going to burn this building down. That's how much it's canon.
I don't think so. I can't. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I don't think we can make that representation or determination now.
The face of Jesus has changed over and over again, depending on what country, what nation, what civilization is doing the portrayal. Some of our oldest depictions of Jesus show him as a blonde-haired guy in a Roman haircut using a magic wand to raise Lazarus from the dead. So much of what we think of as Jesus comes from medieval and Renaissance depictions of him, which is why we think he's a white guy with a beard and looks very Aryan. Not at all like what somebody from first century Judea would look like in the first place.
But obvious inconsistencies, like the physical appearance of Jesus not matching up with the character in the stories, has not kept the Christian church from running with the popular look. Going against what your followers have grown to associate your brand with can be met with animosity. In 1993, the movie Jurassic Park became the highest-grossing film worldwide to that point, which led to abundant merchandising around the globe of its iconic Tyrannosaurus Rex, Velociraptor, and other dinosaurs. Since then, in contradiction to their famous film portrayal, science has proven that many of the dinosaurs depicted in the film would have actually been feathered. But in order to maintain a brand, the latest film in the series maintained its iconic look in spite of changing information and awareness. And so, for now, the series remains, ironically, stuck in the past. Just not the right past to be considered up to date on modern science. Which is okay, because Jurassic Park is science fiction.
It's not debunked and shown to be a lot of nonsense if you can point out these inconsistencies. It's just letting you know what kind of thing you're reading. Literature based on myths and a variety of myths because the concepts are so powerful.
We need to understand what it is and interpret it for what it was meant to be. We need to read it as it was written, not as some imagined historical document.
What I like about comic books and science fiction is, here is the equivalent of ancient mythology, performing the same function that the ancient myths and hero stories and such did, but without making you buy the ticket of admission with belief.
Centuries before Christianity, there was this author by the name of Euhemerus who wrote this book called the Sacred Scriptures, the Sacred Writing, Sacred Inscriptions, in which he claimed that the gods Zeus and Uranus were actually historical kings who were deified. Now, of course, this wasn't true. Zeus and Uranus were celestial gods, had always been. But the point is that he created a biography for them, created a history for them, made them historical. He took gods, plucked them out of the celestial mythical realm, turned them into historical people.
In early 19th century England, the Luddites were a group of weavers and textile workers concerned with being replaced by machines who sabotaged and destroyed machinery in protest. The Luddites took their name from a man named Ned Ludd, who was said to have smashed apart 2 knitting frames setting off this movement. Except there was never a Ned Ludd. No birth records, no newspaper mentions, nothing.
So it appears that this Ned Ludd didn't exist. He was a myth that was spread around to sell this idea of this anti-technology movement. And eventually that wasn't enough to just have the story of this hero. They had to flesh it out into a whole gospel, essentially, this whole biography of him, to base their movement on. And then, of course, people just assumed that he was there for a historical person. He became historical, even though he wasn't historical originally. And we suspect this same thing happened to King Arthur.
Just as Euhemerus had inserted Zeus and Uranus into history by inventing a biography for them, famous figures like Aesop, King Arthur, and Ned Ludd were likewise euhemerized into history as leaders or authors of their particular movements or works. And Zeus and Uranus were far from the only gods and deities to receive such treatment. The Egyptians did it with Osiris, the Romans with Romulus, and even the more modern, though lesser-known cargo cults of Melanesia, which arose upon contact with more technologically advanced cultures in the late 19th century, developed their own historicized saviors, John Frum and Tom Navy.
So this idea of starting with this mystical revelatory concept, or this myth, or this legend, and then turning that into a historical person with a complete biography, it's happening again and again throughout history.
It seems to me that's where Christianity came from, and not only does it not require a historical Jesus at the beginning of it, after all, does anybody think there was a historical Krishna or a historical Mithras or a historical Dionysus? Not the last time I looked. Why must there have been a historical Jesus?
The Apostle Frank Miller, who all credible Wayne Institute scholars unanimously agree was a contemporary of Bruce Wayne in the late 20th century, provides the clearest statement on the historicity of Bruce Wayne Batman in his Gospel of the Dark Knight. I refer to a statement by a Gotham City reporter referred to as Lola on what she cites as the 10th anniversary since Batman's last sighting. In text, I quote, "Our younger viewers will not remember the Batman. A recent survey shows that most high schoolers consider him a myth, but real he was. Real he was." End quote. Real he was indeed. This, coupled with Batman's documented interactions with President Ronald Reagan, recreated in these drawings, for whom we have abundant evidence for. It cannot be denied that both Bruce Wayne and Batman were indeed real people in history. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And now we'll hear from the robot-carrying Dr. Richard Carrier's surviving brain, the CarrierBot 9000, for a rebuttal. CarrierBot 9000, your response.
Red hot, stir us. She is red hot, stir us. Red hot, stir us. Red hot, stir us.
All right, well, while we wait for that to print, here's a word from our sponsors. But first, was Margaret batty? Or was it CarrierBot 9000 who was running a dated OS? Will CarrierBot 9000 have enough ink and paper for his rebuttal? Or will Margaret be the first one to Bat Cave? All this awaits when we return. Same bat time, same bat channel.
I found right off the bat that raised a red flag for me is how little contemporary evidence we have for Jesus at all in the first place. And secondly, how dodgy and questionable that evidence is.
Yeah, it's curious that to know what God thinks, it's always one isolated guy or a couple people that have to go up a hill or into a secret room or whatever, and they get to hear alone what God said. No one else gets to hear it. No one else gets to see God. And then they come back and report what God said. That's dead suspicious.
It's laughable. It's laughable. Why don't you say, therefore, aliens? Just like the guy in the History Channel.
Herod the Great and Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate and Herod Antipas and so on. These were well-known figures. They certainly existed. They're attested in Philo and Josephus and other places. But have you ever heard of historical fiction?
He's withering fig trees. He's walking on water. He's feeding thousands of people with, magic spells. I mean, it's, the sun is going out for 3 hours over the whole earth, and there's all of these things are happening. The Gospels read very much like myths, but what especially sets them apart from histories of antiquity is that historians typically identified who they were and why you should regard them as an authority, and who their sources were.
None of them claim to be eyewitnesses. None of them read like eyewitnesses.
Just because you can pass a civics test doesn't mean that Paul healed people with his handkerchiefs.
This is a fundamental difference that makes myth out of the Gospels, makes the Gospels look like myth rather than look like history of the time. And that's a really significant difference when you combine that fact with the ridiculous nature of what's happening in the Gospels.
We don't have Aramaic sources. We don't have original depictions. We don't have eyewitness accounts of anything that happened to Jesus. What we do have are stories being told about a figure who matches up point by point with all these other savior gods at the time.
Using surviving records and texts, the closest thing we have to a genesis for Christianity is Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians, written at least 2 decades after the supposed lifetime of the Jesus described later in the Gospels. In Paul's correspondence, there are no references to any of the biographical details present in Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John, nor does it present any biographical details of its own. Nor are there any references to any other existing referential materials on Jesus, only reports of visions, spirit communications, and hidden messages in the ancient scriptures. His authority as God, not having witnessed, known, or even heard of Jesus secondhand. There are no birth records in Judea, no Jesus, no Jeshua ben Joseph, no court records, no mentions alongside Pontius Pilate or Herod the Great, no mentions of miracles or miracle workers by any witnesses of any kind until after this one letter by Paul. As Moses allegedly received the laws for the Jewish people from God when he was alone on a mountain, Paul learns of Jesus in a vision while alone as well, just as Muhammad receives a visit from the Archangel Gabriel while alone, and Joseph Smith by the angel Moroni while alone. As a matter of fact, hang on. Wow! I just went in the other room and I talked to God, because he's a fan. And you're not going to believe it, but he froze time. And for 40 days, he dictated all the details of the creation of the universe and a book of rules by which all mankind should live. God told me himself just now, so you should trust me on this. What, you doubt? You doubt what I'm saying? You doubt God? What, you don't believe that I just walked in the other room and God specifically told me how everybody should live their lives? Hey, I'm not the one coming up with this stuff, it's God. And by the way, he's coming back. He told me. So if I were you, I wouldn't want to risk being wrong. Because, God told me. And I say this on his authority.
And if you don't believe that, would you believe this God is talking about more if I told you this God was actually a real person and he's coming back? So get ready.
Actually, he already did come back. Missouri, I believe it was.
So won't you make a donation?
Why does God have to be indistinguishable from lies, from hallucinations, from, just bullshit made up by men for no damn reason except that they want your tithe?
the Super Friends, the Scooby-Doo movies, the Children's Television Workshop.
Yes.
This stuff right here. This
I
stuff
agree.
not only didn't add anything, it subtracted. A total disrespect to the Bat. So, can we all agree?
Also, Casey Kasem was Robin.
Casey Kasem was
I
Robin.
disagree with that because I mean, I grew up watching a lot of this stuff. You know, the Batman Power Hour and you know, the Super Friends, and I knew it was cheesy then. All it did was it made me want to learn more about the characters.
No offense at all, but that's bullshit. You don't need.
That's not bullshit.
You get there through a different vehicle. You still get.
No. You have to. You have to add in the cartoons. You have to add in the
You
movies.
still get there. Justice League is Super Friends with a different name.
Well, hold on. He said something that really piques me. He said, I watched these, and it made me want to look into Batman further.
Exactly.
Which means this didn't satisfy him.
It started with this.
That doesn't make this canon.
It does. It's part of the evolution.
But that means all of this is canon because it all happened.
No,
That's
not
true.
all
True.
influenced
And
by
that's
it.
where
No, some of it is,
Could,
you know,
could the
yeah,
Batman
anyone?
mythos and iconography survive without this garbage? Yes. That's why I don't think that this
Is it damaged with it? No. Listen, if you're not a fan of Scooby-Doo, I mean, that's fine.
You know, Alba makes a very good point that this made me more interested in finding out more about Batman. But you know what you ultimately have to do if this is a portion of your influence at any point at an early age? You have to then unlearn. And though it might be entertaining as fuck and it make your cereal taste a whole lot better, you know what? At the end of the day, you gotta one day then tell yourself, and you can still be a kid when you tell yourself this. You have to tell yourself that was bullshit.
Do they add to the mythos, the iconography and the mythology of the Batman? Not one bit. I agree. I mean, does it get kids interested in looking at Batman? Potentially. But, you know, it's like, here's the Batman mythology, here's the stair step of the Children's Television Workshop. It brings kids, it's kind of like the gateway drug. You know, this is weak. These characters are weak. These are lame. These are silly. Batman's picking up Marvin and Wendy in the Wonder Twin, whatever it is. They're not looking at Batman.
I know. You guys are stepping on his heart.
With what introduced him to the rest of the world, what expanded him, and broadened the minds of, you know, kids as they grew up and started to evolve, he grew up and evolved to where he is now. So, in the same way that I watched Batman and Robin growing up and watched all the cheesy cartoons, I started to get more in the comic books. I started to love the character. Part of knowing Batman is knowing his history. So what makes me personally love Batman so much is that he evolved with me. He grew with me, his character grew with me, and all of the cheesy cartoons, movies evolved along with me. And that's what made it so awesome. And that's why, you know, I've liked him from the very beginning. That's why he's been around for 75 plus years. You know, people can, you know, everyone can have their opinion, that's cool. But when it comes right down to it, the things that excited us as children it's no different from the children of today. If we want to really talk about hope, if we want to talk about the Dark Knight, he also represented hope because he represented being put in a situation where you are alone and have to fight your way up to who you are right now. And as cheesy as it might seem, that's part of the evolution of what brings him to this.
What you just explained, what you just described is important. There are vehicles that exist for Batman where if you're younger and you don't want to be intimidated by the darkness, they can still achieve that. I simply want to get rid of Mystery Inc. and Batman and Robin standing around a campfire in this shitty ass abandoned park discussing the game plan. There's no excuse and there's no reason to ever create this collaborative image in a kid's head. Then they'll have to unlearn that. Because 5 years later, when my son keep asking me, Daddy, when Shaggy gonna help Robin again. I'm like, son, that shit really didn't happen. I'm sorry.
Heading into the 21st century, a University of Chicago study revealed that among its respondents, 2 out of every 3 people maintained the religion they were born into for the entirety of their lives. This indicates a high level of subjectivity in people's religious views, correlating heavily with upbringing more than anything else. So why don't people question more, particularly the academics? Why, after reviewing all of this information, are so few interested in the suggestion of Jesus being purely mythological? Why is it so widely assumed that Jesus is a historical figure when we have no evidence to support it?
Eventually, you start to think, boy, maybe I ought to think twice about my belief. I mean, this guy assumes his is true because he was raised with it. I was raised with mine. Is there any better reason to believe in it?
We don't have all the answers yet. And there's no shame in saying, I don't know something.
The attempt to keep everybody in a bubble of belief is an attempt to stay with a situation where you can simply be born and raised in the religion, and to doubt it will seem as absurd as to doubt the reality of gravity.
Why aren't more biblical historians down with Jesus myth theory? Well, part of that could be, just saying, could be the fact that over time, the vast majority of all biblical scholars have been clergy. They've been preachers. They've been priests. They work for Jesus. He's not just their savior, which is probably biased enough. He's their employer.
Do you think a biblical scholar could review the books of the Bible, review the myths and legends of other religions, have the ability to read and compare them in their original languages, and not come away with an understanding that Christianity and the story of Jesus borrow heavily from pre-existing myths, rituals, and traditions in other religions? Of course they can, but they remain largely silent for wide-ranging reasons, both personal and institutional, and it's different for everyone. But ultimately, we can ask, why does any individual or industry fight against becoming irrelevant? Why did the Luddites destroy the factory machines? Because the machines replaced what they had previously offered themselves.
Then you got to use Occam's razor and ask, what's the likelihood that there was this guy that said all these things and did all these healings and exorcisms and stuff and even walked on water, or that somebody rewrote a bunch of well-known stories?
Carrier Bot 9000 is awesome.
Carrier Bot 9000 rules. I can't believe we used to believe in this Batman myth.
We're smart.
Hey there, Batman, it's me, Margaret. I couldn't convince anyone you were real today, but I know you're real. I don't care what anybody else says.
Margaret.
Batman?
No, don't turn around. Just listen. I'm not real.
What do you mean?
You're talking to yourself.
But I'm talking to you, you're...
Bat Priest. There is no Batman. Only people like me and people like you.
If there is no Batman, then who'll redeem mankind and save the faithful?
I believe Batman will.
But you just said you don't think he's real.
If he was, he's not here now. I certainly don't know enough to say if he was or is. But I still believe he'll save us. That is my belief.
If you don't believe he's real and you can't communicate with him, then how?
Batman is not a person to me. It's an idea. That's what's real. You need Batman, he's here for you. You need a person, they're all around. Just don't confuse the two.
Y'all are completely mixing up I like it with canon.
No,
Would you
no.
would you consider
The
this
whole
canon?
point of liking it, especially if you're a fan of Batman, is making it canon.
It seems to me that we're building the canon here, like we looked at Batman the Animated Series and we said that was an ideal version of the character. But I just wanted to ask the panel if we were like going that route specifically.
It's difficult because of the way that this was presented. It wasn't necessarily presented in a chronological sense. It's like
exactly.
So we end up looking at it from a do I like this, do I not like this shit. But there's some
70
ebbs
years,
and woes,
it's
some
gonna be
peaks and
tough.
valleys in
It's
there
a lot.
of good shit and bad shit.
Because this isn't Harry Potter. This is, 78 years, like you were saying. Of this character constantly changing. As the times changed, the character had to change.
In the first appearance of Robin in 1940, Batman and Robin were fighting some criminals on girders. Robin kicks a guy off into space. In the first episode, the first appearance of Robin, he kills a guy.
Yeah.
Kills a guy, knocks the
He's a
gangster
little
right off the
green.
girder. But, and then he becomes Nightwing, and I mean, things change. Things have to change. Things have to evolve. Batman hasn't been the same since 1939. He has evolved. He has changed. He has kept up with the times.
So what do we do with these old books? With these old stories? Do we throw them out the window? We don't believe they're 100% accurate, so burn them?
Was there a historical Jesus, etc.? I don't know, but that certainly doesn't destroy the power of the Sermon on the Mount or the prophecies of Isaiah. I mean, they seem to say what they say, and they got a lot to say to you.
Each story has a message, a moral to it. It has an allegorical point that tells you something like, this is how, follow Jesus, the way Jesus does this in this particular situation. If you're a missionary and you face that same situation, quote Jesus, follow Jesus, use this as your story to tell, to explain your point.
The story serves its purpose of teaching values and traditions to its people.
The original Christianity, if this theory is true, if there wasn't originally a Jesus, if he was a revelatory being to begin with and was only euhemerized, historicized later, decades later, that means Christianity was being preached across 3 continents for multiple decades without a historical Jesus. That means you can have a Christianity without a historical Jesus. You could go back to the original Christian belief.
I wish there was a Superman. I wish there was a Batman. It's disappointing that they're not, but you get something out of reading these things.
If I may have your attention, please. Lady and gentlemen, there's been something about this day that hasn't been what it seemed. You know me as introspective man, but there's something I've been hiding from you. What you don't know is it was me all along, the director of this film, Joseph Richards. It was me all along. Guys, my true identity was
Yeah, guys, it's the director. Isn't that weird? He's the director. All right, cut. Take 2, action.
Aren't you guys startled by the reveal?
Yeah, hate to tell you, but Giggly Boy here kind of told us all during lunch.
Dude, I know you.
Damn it, Matt.
Yes, but I told them to still act surprised.
You can't tell people to be surprised. That's its antithesis. You can't be surprised if you already know something. Huh? Can you?
Yeah, way to go, guys.
Sorry.
I like your outfit, though.
That's amazing.
Introspective man. I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but I got something you might want to take a look at. Looks like we're not rid of our Riddler yet.
An exhibit of a crowd of all the same people. This isn't even spelled right. This is stupid.
It's not stupid, Joseph. I mean, introspective man. Okay, it's not stupid.
There's no Z in exhibit.
There's no Z in Joseph either.
What?
I said maybe it's an intentional misspelling.
I just thought of something. Maybe it's an intentional typo. A mirror exhibit. Yo, dog, I heard you like mirrors, so I put a mirror inside your Holy Inception, Giggly Boy! The old mirror maze. The Riddler's gone to the old mirror maze on 42nd Street. We must leave at once.
Wait, so you're the director, or are you guys LARPing?
Well, no, we're we're like superheroes.
Well, no, not really.
Kind of.
No,
we're
really.
superheroes. Yeah, we're superheroes. Do we need to clean up this equipment or anything?
We got just Scooney. We got Scooney.
Bye, guys.
So what about Batman the Long Halloween? Where are we sitting on that one?
No, let's talk about.
No, really.
No,
no,
we need to revisit Scooby-Doo.
Yeah,
no, we need to.
Well, you couldn't accuse the Riddler from shying away from the dramatic.
Nah, perhaps you could say he's quite artistic and deep.
Not really. This is overly dramatic and obvious symbolism, in my opinion.
All right, well, I think the Riddler's a pretty cool guy, okay?
Why? He's our nemesis.
Well, as far as people I detest go, he's one of the better ones, all right?
Whatever, giggly boy. It seems we'll have to go in deeper to find the Riddler.
Yes, I suppose we do.
Giggly boy! Trapdoor, I should have known! Wait, Giggly boy, I see you crawling, I'm here! Oh shit! Ah! I'm being dragged! Giggly boy!
Only a little further, introspective man. Only a little further, introspective man. Only a little further, introspective man.
I wish there was a Superman. I wish there was a Batman. It's disappointing that they're not. But you get something out of reading these things.
People invented religion to get kind of a peaceful, comfortable experience, because the world is not a comfortable or secure place to live. People needed an image. Whether there is a Buddha or not, the teaching is there in the world. The major force behind everything in the world, in the universe, is the impermanency, constant and continuous change. Always we are biased. We are bound to the good or to the bad. We become judgmental. We judge ourselves as someone unique or someone special, and judge the other people. Believing is not enough. Enlightenment is not enough. Learn to be peaceful. All the negative and positive traits are contagious. If we are peaceful, everybody in our family, everybody in our community learns to be peaceful.
Well, well, well. Looks like you solved my latest riddle. I'm so proud of you. But I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve. Introspective man.
Stop that.
You still have no idea who I am, do you?
Are you Matt?
Too late. It was me. I was the Riddler the whole time.
Okay.
Who were you expecting? Jim Carrey?
No, I said Matt.
Naturally. That's how I knew all the answers to those riddles. Scooty, is that you? Are you playing a prank?
Wait a minute, there's a Riddler here already? Well, for fuck's sake.
Joker, what are you doing
You know
here?
what? I'm not doing this anymore. I had a whole thing in mind. I'm not going to go into it now, but just know that it's completely ruined if there's already a Riddler here.
Maybe we could team up? Huh?
No, forget it. I'm not doing it. Can you smoke in here?
Anyways, I've given you many riddles, introspective man, but now it's time for an answer. Impossible.
What?
You think you can canonize the Batman series, but it was never meant to be canonized. It was never intended to be one work, and it never needed to connect and make sense.
Okay, that's not the point of the film, Matt. I know that. I knew that. That's the point. The idea is that we are we're comparing and illustrating the evolution of mythology over time by using the modern example of the Batman series to illustrate how the character of Jesus came to be what he is today. Something like that, okay?
You know what? I gotta go wash this makeup off. I can't. This is it's starting to itch.
Wait, who are you actually?
This is Paul Provenza. He narrated the film.
Paul Provenza. Where do I know that name from?
Well, I hosted the Green Room. Did all the late night talk shows, things. Stuff
No. I'm more of a sitcom guy. Harry and the Hendersons, Hang with Mr. Cooper. Were you in any of those?
Empty Nest. You a fan of Empty Nest?
Oh, huge fan. Do not remember who you are, though.
I was there. You can't. I was younger then, and the makeup makes it hard.
Were you Dreyfus?
Was I the dog? You were asking me if I was the dog.
Well, what else would I know you from?
Northern Exposure.
Nope.
Facts of Life.
Never heard of it.
How about The Aristocrats? Did you ever see that movie about the filthy joke? I directed that. The joke and the kids fucking the dog.
I know Paul Provenza. You're the Donkey Love guy.
Donkey Love?
Well, I wouldn't refer to myself as the Donkey Love guy, but yes, I am, in fact, listed as one of the producers on that film, yes.
What's Donkey Love?
It's this great film about people fucking donkeys in Colombia.
What?
Highly recommended.
Are you kidding me? People told me that when I was down there by the coast. That's a real thing?
Yeah, it's a real thing. People do that down there.
It's really interesting. Fascinating.
Yeah. Super fascinating. Very interesting. It's one of my favorite films of the 2010. But come on, guys. It's like 5 o'clock. We're kind of off topic here. You guys want to go outside?
Sometimes people just make shit up.
Huh. Yeah, and now it's ruined. So thanks, Joseph.
You know, Matt, even though you made it clear earlier that you completely missed the point of this film, sometimes people just make shit up. Yeah. That about sums it up. How did you know we were in the Mirror Maze?
I read the script. Didn't care for it.
I don't want to feel better. I want to feel worse. I want to feel the whole world's pain and the whole world's hurt. I don't want to numb this. I don't want to disappear. I want to feel this pain until I lose this fear. Oh. got this list of what ought to be. I've got my white knuckled fists, death gripping fantasy. Now life is life, and we are all just dreamers, awake, asleep, shepherds and sheep, believers and schemers. I'll take the pain, thanks all the same, and this will all be over soon. Living is living, dying is no different. On the earth, out on Mars and on. Yeah, dying's no different. Dying is no different. On the earth, out on Mars and on. This song goes out to Elon Musk, who wants to die on Mars. And he's making some real progress towards that goal. He's building his own spaceships and shit. I suppose going to Mars is as good a distraction as any. Good luck, Elon. But you know, I get the feeling that there's a lot of people on this earth who would choose not to die at all if that were an option. Not me. Not me. I'd fight to the death if someone tried to make me live here forever.